A child found a locked box in the attic and unlocked a disappearance from 1989. The dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight, piercing the attic's gloom. A silent ballet for an audience of forgotten things. 10-year-old Leo coughed, a small, dry sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet. He wasn't supposed to be up here. Mum's rules were as clear as the summer sky outside. The attic was off limits. It was, she'd said, full of splinters and spiders, and memories best left undisturbed. But the house groaned with a loneliness that echoed his own. And the forbidden space called to him with the siren song of secrets. He'd found the pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, a flimsy, skeletal thing that shuddered under his weight, and hoisted himself into the suffocating heat. It smelled of old paper and cedar and something else, something faintly sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. He moved cautiously, his sneakers scuffing against the rough-hewn floorboards. Ghostly shapes, draped in white sheets, loomed around him like sleeping giants. A rocking horse from his own toddlerhood, a crib he didn't remember. Stacks of his father's old vinyl records, their vibrant covers dulled by a film of grey. His father, the word was a hollow space in his chest. A photograph on the mantelpiece downstairs, a man with kind eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. A name on a stone in the town cemetery. That was all Leo had of him. He was tracing the outline of a dust-covered birdcage when his fingers brushed against something hard and cold. He pulled back the sheet. It wasn't a piece of furniture. It was a trunk, not a grand treasure chest sort of trunk, but a simple, dark green footlocker. Its metal clasps rusted shut. It looked military, maybe, or like something you'd take to a boarding school you never wanted to see again. It was the lock that intrigued him. It wasn't a padlock, but a small, built-in combination lock. Its 3 dials frozen on a random sequence of numbers. A thrill, sharp and illicit, shot through him. This was a real secret. Not a grown-up memory, but something hidden. Something locked away on purpose. He tried to force the clasps, his small fingers straining against the corroded metal, but they wouldn't budge. He jiggled the dials, listening for the telltale click, but there was only a gritty scraping sound. Defeated, he sat back on his heels, the dust swirling around him. The sweet, cloying smell was stronger here, emanating from the trunk itself. He leaned closer, wrinkling his nose. It was like potpourri, but sickly. Old roses and lavender, maybe. His eyes scanned the dimness, searching for a key, a tool, anything. And then he saw it. Tucked behind a stack of yellowed newspapers, almost invisible in the shadows, was a small leather-bound book. A diary. He picked it up, the leather cool and smooth against his skin. It was worn, the corners softened with use. There was no name. On the cover, only a single, embossed gold star. He opened it. The first page was blank, but on the inside cover, written in a looping, girlish cursive, were 3 numbers. 8-1-5. His heart hammered against his ribs. It couldn't be that simple. Could it? He scrambled back to the trunk, his breath catching in his throat. He lined up the first dial to 8, the second to 1, the third to 5. He held his breath and pulled on the right side clasp. A loud, grating click echoed through the attic. It was so sudden, so final, that he flinched back. The clasp had sprung open. He stared at it, a wave of disbelief and triumph washing over him. He'd done it. He'd unlocked the secret. With trembling hands, he opened the other clasp and slowly, cautiously, lifted the heavy lid. The smell hit him first, a concentrated wave of that same sweet, decaying floral scent. It was overwhelming now, thick and suffocating. He gagged, his eyes watering. But it was what he saw that made the air freeze in his lungs. The trunk wasn't filled with old clothes or forgotten toys. It was filled with a life. A girl's life, perfectly preserved. On top lay a high school yearbook, its blue cover stamped with the year 1989. Next to it, a collection of cassette tapes, their handwritten labels bearing the names of bands he'd never heard of: The Cure, Depeche Mode, The Smiths. There was a friendship bracelet, its threads of pink and purple, still vibrant. A small, stuffed unicorn with a silver horn. A movie ticket stub for something called Heathers, and letters. Dozens of letters, tied in a faded pink ribbon. He reached in, his fingers brushing against a framed photograph. He pulled it out. It was a girl, maybe 16 or 17, with a cascade of dark, curly hair, and a smile that was both shy and defiant. She wore a denim jacket covered in pins and a silver locket around her neck. Her eyes, wide and brown, seemed to look right at him, full of a light that felt impossibly alive. He'd never seen her before. She wasn't family. Who was she? He set the photo aside and continued to dig, a strange mix of guilt and insatiable curiosity propelling him forward. Beneath the letters and the tapes, nestled in a bed of what looked like dried brown petals and leaves, was a dress. It was white, made of delicate lace, like a prom dress or a wedding dress. He lifted a corner of it, and that's when he saw the stain, a dark rust-colored stain, spread across the bodice of the white lace, like a grotesque flower. It was stiff to the touch. He didn't understand at first. It looked like spilled wine, maybe. But, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw the smaller splatters, the way the color had soaked deep into the fibers. A cold dread, colder than the grave, seeped into his bones. He knew, with a certainty that defied his age, that it wasn't wine. His gaze fell back inside the trunk. Tucked into a side pocket, almost hidden, was a single, small object. A sheriff's badge, not a toy, but a real one, heavy and gold, with the name of his town Harmony Creek engraved on it. And beneath the name, another engraving, a title. That made no sense in this box of teenage dreams and nightmares. Sheriff Thompson. Sheriff Thompson, the man who sometimes came to his mother's diner for coffee. The man with the booming laugh and the paunch that strained against his uniform. The man who always gave Leo a silver dollar and told him to stay out of trouble. A floorboard creaked. Downstairs. Leo, are you home from school? His mother's voice, panic seized him. He couldn't be found up here, not with this. He slammed the lid of the trunk shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. The clasps wouldn't lock again without resetting the combination, but there was no time. He shoved the small diary into the back pocket of his jeans, his mind racing. He had to get out. He scrambled back towards the ladder, his heart pounding, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He glanced back at the trunk, a dark, silent monolith in the center of the attic. He had opened something that was never meant to be opened. He had stumbled into a story that had been buried for decades. The face of the girl in the photograph flashed in his mind, her bright, defiant eyes. The dark stain on the white dress? The sheriff's badge. As he lowered himself down the rickety ladder, leaving the suffocating heat and the smell of dead flowers behind, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a memory best left undisturbed. This was a scream that had been silenced, and he had just been the first person to hear it in 30 years. He pulled the cord, and the attic door folded itself back into the ceiling with a soft final thump, sealing the darkness once more. But the secret was out now. It was in his pocket. And it was already beginning to poison the quiet, orderly world. He thought he knew. The image of the badge, glinting in the gloom, was burned into his mind. Sheriff Thompson, a man of the law, a man whose badge was hidden in a dead girl's coffin-like trunk. The injustice of it was a physical weight, a stone in his gut. Why? How? The questions swirled, a dizzying vortex of fear and a terrible burgeoning anger. He had to know. He had to understand what happened to the girl with the defiant smile, and why the man who was supposed to protect their town was a part of her dark, buried secret. He crept down the hallway, the diary, a hot, rectangular brand against his skin. His childhood ending in the dusty, silent space between one heartbeat and the next. The girl in the photograph was named Sarah Jenkins. He learned this from the first few pages of the diary, his hands trembling as he read under the covers of his bed. A flashlight creating a small secret tent of light. Her cursive was a series of exuberant loops and sharp, determined angles. She wrote about classes she hated and friends she loved. She wrote about sneaking out to see a midnight movie and the way the stars looked over Harmony Creek from the top. Of Miller's Ridge, she wrote about a boy named Michael who worked at the gas station and had a crooked smile that made her stomach feel like it was full of fizzing soda. And she wrote about him, Sheriff Thompson. But she didn't call him that. She called him Uncle Rick. August 1st, 1989. Michael finally asked me out. A real date. We're going to the drive-in on Friday. I'm so excited, I could scream. Mum is being weird about it, of course. She said Michael isn't our kind of people. Whatever that means. Uncle Rick stopped by tonight. He brought pizza. He said Mum was just worried that she wants the best for me. He's always so good at calming her down. He told me I looked beautiful and that any boy would be lucky to take me out. He said it in that low voice he uses sometimes. It makes my skin feel crawly. But he's the sheriff. He's family. I'm supposed to trust him. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Uncle Rick. He was her uncle. Or was it just a nickname? He kept reading, the words painting a picture of a life that felt both impossibly distant and vividly real. Sarah was the victim. He knew it in his gut. She was the ghost in the attic. The antagonist, Sheriff Rick Thompson, began to take shape not as the jovial man from the diner, but as a shadow lurking at the edges of Sarah's bright, teenage world. He was a constant presence in the diary entries. He was there after school, his patrol car parked in their driveway. He was there on weekends, offering to take Sarah and her mother out for dinner. He was a pillar of the community, a protector. But in Sarah's private words, a different picture emerged. A picture of possessiveness, of quiet control. August 15th, 1989, had a huge fight with Mum. She found out. Michael and I went to the lake after the movie. She grounded me for 2 weeks. She said I was being reckless. Then, Uncle Rick came over. He didn't yell. He never yells. He just sat in the living room, polishing his badge, and told me how disappointed he was. He said he expected better from me. He said a girl like me needs to be careful, that there are dangers in the world I don't understand. He looked at me, and his eyes were so cold, it felt like he was the danger. The power imbalance was stark, suffocating. Sarah was a teenager, vibrant and straining for independence. Her mother, Carol Jenkins, was a nervous, fragile woman who, according to the diary, relied heavily on her brother-in-law Rick, after her husband had passed away years earlier. Rick was the man of the house, the authority figure, the law. His control was absolute, disguised as protection, as love. And then, Leo found the witness. September 5th, 1989. I hate this. I hate him. Michael broke up with me. He said it was too complicated. He said he was scared. Scared of what? Of my mom? Or of my uncle? Uncle Rick saw him at the gas station yesterday. Michael wouldn't tell me what he said, but he was pale. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I tried to talk to him, but he just shook his head and walked away. I feel so alone. The only person who seems to get it is Daniel. He sees it. He sees the way Uncle Rick looks at me. Daniel is quiet. He's always in the background, but he sees everything. He's Michael's best friend. He works at the diner. He told me today, his hands were shaking. He said, "Be careful, Sarah." That's all he said. Be careful. Daniel Miller. The name was a jolt. Daniel Miller was the quiet, sad-eyed man who now owned the diner. The man who had inherited it from his parents. The man who still gave Leo's mum a job, even when business was slow. The man who always looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was the hidden witness. He had been there. He had seen something. Leo felt like he was suffocating. The small tent of his blanket was no longer a safe haven, but a tomb. He was holding 30 years of secrets in his hands. Sarah, the bright, vibrant girl who just wanted to fall in love. Sheriff Thompson, the respected lawman who was a monster in disguise. And Daniel, the quiet boy who had watched it all unfold, and had carried that silence into adulthood. The diary detailed Sarah's growing fear, her increasing isolation. Rick's protection became a cage. He'd show up at her school. He'd question her friends. He drove Michael out of town with a threat that was never spoken aloud but was clearly understood. He was chipping away at her world, piece by piece, until he was the only thing left in it. October 12, 1989. He gave me a dress today. A beautiful white lace dress. He said it was for my 17th birthday next month. He said I would look like an angel in it. I told him I didn't want it. I told him to leave me alone. He didn't get angry. He just smiled. That terrible calm smile. He said, "Sarah, Sarah, you don't know what's good for you, but I do. I'll always take care of you. You're mine." He touched my hair. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I just stood there. Daniel was washing dishes in the kitchen. Our eyes met for just a second. He looked away so fast. He's scared too. We're all so scared of him. The words were a confession, a plea from beyond the grave. Leo's hands were slick with sweat. The white lace dress. The dress in the trunk. The dress with the dark, ugly stain. This was it. This was the story of how Sarah Jenkins disappeared. It wasn't a mystery. It was an execution. He read on, his young mind struggling to comprehend the casual cruelty, the slow, methodical destruction of a girl's life. Rick Thompson had used his power, his badge, his position of trust, not to protect, but to possess. He had isolated Sarah from her mother, her friends, her first love. He had turned her home into a prison, and her life into a waking nightmare. The injustice was a physical thing, a bitter taste in the back of Leo's throat. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1989. Halloween, he knows I know. I found the letters, the ones Mum wrote to him before she died. Not my dad's brother, he's not my uncle at all. He was obsessed with her, she was afraid of him, she was trying to get away. He lied. He's been lying to me my whole life. I confronted him. I told him I was going to tell everyone the truth. He just laughed. He said, "Who would believe you?" He locked my door. He said we were going to have a special celebration tonight, just the two of us. He wants me to wear the white dress. I'm so scared. I managed to get this diary to Daniel. I threw it out my window when he went to get a soda from the kitchen. Daniel was in the alley. He saw. He picked it up. I don't know what's going to happen. But if I'm not here tomorrow, it was him. It was Rick Thompson. Don't let him get away with it. Please, Daniel, please. Leo's breath hitched. A sob, hot and raw, escaped his lips. He slammed the diary shut. It was too much. The final, desperate plea, the terror in those last few lines. Daniel had the diary. Daniel knew, and he had done nothing. For 30 years, he had stayed silent. He had let Rick Thompson walk free, let him become a respected figure in their town. While Sarah's body, her life, her story, lay rotting in a trunk in a dusty attic, the weight of the secret was crushing. It was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a crime to be exposed. He thought of Daniel Miller's sad eyes, the permanent slump of his shoulders. It wasn't just sadness, it was guilt. It was fear that had curdled into a lifetime of shame. He thought of Sheriff Thompson, clapping him on the back at the diner, his laughter echoing off the checkered floors, a monster hiding in plain sight. Leo felt a surge of rage so pure and so hot it burned away his fear. He couldn't go to his mum, she wouldn't believe him. She trusted Rick. Everyone trusted Rick. He couldn't go to the police. Rick was the police. There was only one person who could corroborate this story. One person who had been there, the witness. He had to go to Daniel. He had to make him remember. He had to make him speak. The cliffhanger wasn't in the attic anymore. It was here, now, in his own small bedroom. The knowledge was a ticking bomb, and he, a 10-year-old boy, was the only one who could decide when, and how, it would finally explode. He clutched the diary to his chest, the leather cool against his feverish skin. The story was no longer about a curious child finding a box. It was about a dead girl's last wish, and the boy who was now bound to see it through. No matter the cost, the next morning, the world felt tilted on its axis. The familiar chirping of sparrows outside his window sounded like a warning. The smell? of his mum's pancakes from the kitchen was nauseating. He tucked the diary into his backpack, the weight of it a constant, physical reminder of the task ahead. At school, the lessons were a meaningless drone. Faces and numbers swam before his eyes. All he could see was Sarah's looping cursive, Sheriff Thompson's cold smile, and Daniel Miller's haunted gaze. He knew he couldn't just walk up to Daniel and confront him. A 10-year-old boy with a dead girl's diary. They'd think he was crazy. They'd take it from him. Rick would find out. He needed a plan. He needed to understand the man Daniel had become. After school, instead of going home, he went to the diner. Miller's Diner was a town institution, a relic of chrome and red vinyl that had survived decades of change. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that felt like a lie. Daniel was behind the counter, wiping it down with a damp cloth. He looked up, and for a moment, his usual weary sadness was replaced by a flicker of warmth. "Hey, Leo, your mum's not on shift today, you hungry?" Leo's throat was dry. He shook his head and slid onto a stool at the counter. "Just waiting for my friend." It was a weak lie, but Daniel just nodded and went back to his wiping. Leo watched him. He was a man hollowed out by time. His movements were slow, methodical, as if he were conserving a finite supply of energy. He rarely made eye contact with his customers, focusing instead on the coffee pots, the grill, the worn linoleum floor. He was a ghost in his own life, just like Sarah was a ghost in the attic. Leo spent the next week observing him. He'd sit in a corner booth, pretending to do his homework, nursing a single soda for an hour. He watched Daniel interact with the townspeople. He was polite, but distant. He'd offer a tired smile, a quiet nod. He was a fixture, a piece of the town's scenery, unremarkable and easily overlooked. And Leo realized that was the point. Daniel had spent 30 years making himself invisible. The injustice of it festered in Leo's chest. Daniel's silence was a betrayal. It was a second death for Sarah. Every day that Rick Thompson wore his badge, every time he was hailed as a hero, was another shovel of dirt on her memory. The conflict wasn't just between Leo and the truth anymore. It was between the past and the present, between a dead girl's plea and a living man's fear. He saw the fear in Daniel's eyes whenever Sheriff Thompson's patrol car drove past the diner. Daniel would freeze, his hand hovering over a coffee cup, his gaze fixed on the street until the car was gone. He would never look directly at it, but his whole body would tense, a coiled spring of 30-year-old terror. Rick still had that power over him. The cruelty hadn't ended in 1989. It had simply changed its form. It was a lifelong sentence of fear for the witness who had failed to speak. Leo knew he had to escalate. He had to force a reaction. He started small. One afternoon, when the diner was empty, he walked up to the counter. "Mr. Miller." Daniel looked up, his eyes tired. "Yeah, Leo. My teacher gave us a project," Leo said, his heart hammering. "About local history. I have to write about something that happened here, in Harmony Creek, a long time ago." Daniel shrugged. "Not much happens here, kid. You could write about the founding of the town, I guess." "The old mill?" "I was thinking of something more recent," Leo pressed on, his voice trembling slightly. "Like from the 80s. Did anything interesting happen then?" A shutter came down over Daniel's face. The flicker of warmth was gone, replaced by a guarded emptiness. "The 80s, I don't know. I was just a kid myself. Nothing I can think of." He turned away, busying himself with the coffee machine. A clear dismissal. It was a wall. A wall built of fear and shame, brick by brick. Over 3 decades, Leo felt a surge of frustration. He had to be bolder. The next day, he went back. This time, he brought one of the cassette tapes from the trunk. It was The Cure. He walked up to the old jukebox in the corner, a machine that probably hadn't been updated since 1995, and saw that it had a cassette player. He fumbled with the tape, his hands slick with sweat, and pushed it in. He pressed play. The melancholic jangly guitars of Just Like Heaven filled the diner. The song was a ghost. It was the sound of 1989. Daniel froze behind the counter. The coffee pot in his hand tilted, a stream of dark liquid splashing onto the floor. He didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the jukebox, his face ashen. His breath was shallow, his knuckles white where he gripped the pot. Leo watched him, his own heart aching with a mixture of pity and ruthless determination. He had found a crack in the wall. "Cool song," Leo said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense silence. "My dad used to listen to this stuff." Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there, paralyzed by the music, transported back to a time he had tried so desperately to bury. He looked at Leo then, and for the first time, Leo didn't see a tired diner owner. He saw the scared teenage boy from the diary. He saw the witness, and in his eyes, there was a flicker of something new, suspicion. He was looking at Leo, really looking at him, and wondering how this boy, this child, knew which song to play. The antagonist, meanwhile, was growing bolder in his own way. Sheriff Thompson was a constant presence in Leo's life now, a smiling predator who was utterly unaware of the storm gathering around him. He'd see Leo in town and ruffle his hair, his hand feeling like a brand on Leo's scalp. "Keeping out of trouble, son." He'd boom, his voice full of false bonhomie. Leo would just nod, his stomach churning. The diary in his backpack feeling like a block of ice. The humiliation was a daily ritual. Leo had to sit in the diner and watch his mother laugh at Rick's jokes. He had to listen to the townspeople praise the sheriff for his dedication, for keeping Harmony Creek safe. Safe. The word was a mockery. The town wasn't safe. It was a tomb, built on a foundation of lies and fear, and this man was its cheerful, decorated warden. The betrayal felt personal. His own mother, his whole town, was complicit in their ignorance. They were celebrating a monster. Leo felt utterly alone, the sole guardian of a truth so terrible it could shatter their peaceful little world. He was a child soldier in a war no one else knew was being fought. He knew he had one last card to play, the biggest one. He had to show Daniel the diary. It was a massive risk. Daniel could take it and destroy it. He could go to Rick, he could deny everything. But Leo was running out of time. The secret was eating him alive. He felt like he was going to explode with the injustice of it all. He waited for a rainy Tuesday. A day when the diner would be slow, when the world outside would be as gray and miserable as he felt. He walked in, the bell chiming ominously. Daniel was alone, staring out the window at the rain-streaked street. Leo walked up to the counter and placed his backpack on the worn vinyl stool next to him. He didn't say anything. He just unzipped the bag, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp the zipper. He pulled out the small, leather-bound book. He slid it across the counter. The diary, with its single embossed gold star, sat between them. It was a bomb. Daniel stared at it. He didn't move, he didn't breathe. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, corpse-like pallor. All the years fell away. He was 17 again, standing in a dark alley, looking up at a window as a small book fell from the sky. Where, he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. A sound that hadn't been used in 30 years. "Where did you get that?" "In my attic," Leo said, his own voice, quiet but steady. "In a trunk, with her dress and his badge." Daniel's eyes snapped up to meet Leo's. The fear in them was a living thing, a wild animal cornered and terrified. But underneath it, for the first time, Leo saw a flicker of something else. A spark of the boy who had once been Sarah's friend. A glimmer of the conscience that had been buried under a mountain of shame. "You have to help me," Leo said, his voice cracking with the weight of it all. "She asked you to, she wrote it in there. Please, Daniel, please, you can't let him get away with it. Not anymore." Daniel's hand trembled as he reached for the diary. He opened it, his fingers tracing the familiar, looping cursive. A single choked sob escaped his lips. It was the sound of a dam breaking. 30 years of silence, of guilt, of terror, all coming undone by a 10-year-old boy and a ghost's last wish. The conflict had reached its breaking point. The witness was no longer hidden. He was exposed. And now, he had to make a choice. Retreat back into the shadows. Or, finally, after a lifetime of running, step into the light. The tension in the small, empty diner was a physical force. A silent, screaming vortex that threatened to pull them both under. Daniel's hand shook so violently that the pages of the diary fluttered like a trapped bird. He stared at Sarah's last, desperate entry, his face a mask of anguish. The diner, usually filled with the comforting clatter of plates and conversation, was unnervingly silent. The only sound, the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window and Daniel's ragged breathing. He looked up at Leo, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed to swallow the entire room. "He'll kill me," Daniel whispered, the words brittle, like dead leaves. "Leo, you don't understand. He's not just the sheriff, he's everything. He owns this town. He'll kill me, and he'll make it look like an accident. Just like he did with her." "She wasn't an accident," Leo said, his voice ringing with a certainty that belied his age. "You know she wasn't. He locked her in her room. He was going to hurt her. She was trying to escape." "I know," Daniel choked out, a tear finally breaking free and tracing a path through the weary lines on his face. "I know, I was there. I was in the alley. I saw him close her window. After she threw the diary down, I saw the light go on in her room. I heard her scream." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. "I heard her scream, and I ran. I ran, and I never looked back. I was 17, I was a coward." The confession hung in the air, thick and poisoned. This was the hidden clue, the piece Leo was missing. It wasn't just that Daniel had the diary. He had heard the murder. He was an ear witness to Sarah's final moments. The full, horrific conspiracy began to unfurl in Leo's mind. Rick Thompson hadn't just made a girl disappear. He had committed murder, and the entire town, through ignorance and fear, had become his unwitting accomplice. His power wasn't just political. It was absolute, built on a foundation of violence and sustained by the silence of those he terrorized. "He came to me the next day," Daniel continued, his voice muffled by his hands. "He knew she'd given me the diary. He didn't even have to ask. He just looked at me, and I knew he knew. He didn't threaten me. He didn't have to. He just said, he said, 'Carol is so distraught, it seems Sarah ran away. It would break her heart to think anything else happened. We have to protect Carol.'" He was talking about her mum. "But he was looking at me. He was telling me what the story was, and I was supposed to stick to it." The stakes shifted, exploding from the personal pain of a boy and a ghost to the horrifying reality of a public scandal. This was a cover-up, orchestrated by the highest law enforcement officer in Harmony Creek. "He said he'd take care of me," Daniel said, a bitter self-loathing laugh escaping his lips. "He got my parents the loan to expand this diner. He made sure I always had a job. He made sure I stayed quiet. He didn't put me in a cage of bars. He put me in this one." He swept his arm out, indicating the diner, the chrome, the vinyl, the life he had been trapped in. "He let me live, but he took my life. Every day, I see him. I serve him coffee, and I have to smile." Leo's blood ran cold. The web was so much bigger and more insidious than he had imagined. It wasn't just a moment of rage, it was a 30-year campaign of psychological torture, a constant looming threat that had hollowed Daniel out completely. "We have to tell someone," Leo insisted, his initial rage now tempered by a cold, hard resolve. "We have to go to the state police." Daniel looked up, his eyes wild with panic, and "Say what?" "A 10-year-old boy found a diary that I've kept hidden for 30 years. That I'm an accessory after the fact. They'll arrest me. And Rick has friends everywhere. In the county, in the state. He's been building his network for decades. It's my word against a decorated sheriff. Who do you think they'll believe?" He was right. The thought was a punch to the gut. The system was rigged. Rick had insulated himself perfectly. They had no proof. The diary was just a story. The dress, the trunk, it was all circumstantial. They had no body. They had no weapon. All they had was the word of a traumatized man and a 10-year-old boy. Leo's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, a chink in Rick's armor. He thought about the trunk, the dress, the badge. Why the badge? Why would Rick leave his own badge in the trunk with her body? It made no sense. Unless he hadn't. The badge, Leo said slowly, a new, electrifying thought taking shape. Why was his badge in the trunk? Daniel frowned, confused. His badge? What are you talking about? There was a sheriff's badge in the trunk. Leo explained, his voice quickening with excitement. An old one. It said, Sheriff Thompson. Daniel's eyes widened in dawning horror and comprehension. Oh God, no. It wasn't his badge, Leo. It was his father's. His father's. Rick's father, Frank Thompson, was the sheriff before him. Daniel explained, his voice low and urgent. He was a monster. A violent, abusive drunk. Everyone knew it, but no one did anything. He died of a heart attack in '88, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Rick took over. He promised to be different. He promised to be a new kind of lawman. The plot twist was a gut punch. The badge wasn't a clue left by the killer. It was a trophy. It was a symbol. Sarah's father, Daniel, continued piecing it together. He was a deputy. He tried to stand up to Frank Thompson. He reported him for corruption, for brutality. Frank ruined him. He ran him out of the force, out of the town. He died a few years later, a broken man. Sarah hated the Thompsons. Both of them. She told me once that the badge was a symbol of everything that was rotten in this town. The full, sickening picture snapped into focus. This wasn't just about Rick's obsession with Sarah. It was a generational vendetta. Rick wasn't just silencing a girl who knew his secret. He was finishing what his father started. He was destroying the last remnant of the family that had dared to defy his own. The cruelty was deeper, the rot more profound than Leo could ever have imagined. So the badge. Leo trailed off, understanding. She must have had it, Daniel whispered. Maybe her dad kept it. Maybe she found it. Maybe she was going to use it to expose him, to show that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That Rick was just like his father. This was it. This was the proof they needed. The badge connected Rick, not just to Sarah, but to a deeper, darker history of corruption and violence. It provided a motive that went beyond obsession. It established a pattern. But how could they use it? The badge was still in the trunk, in his attic. If they went to the state police now, Rick would find out. He would get to the trunk first. He would destroy the evidence. They had one chance. One shot to expose him before he could plug the leak. We can't go to the police, Leo said, his voice low and intense. The diner, the rain, the world outside, faded away. There was only this moment, this single, terrifying point of decision. We have to expose him. Publicly, we have to do it in a way that he can't control, a way he can't escape. The tension in the room was electric, a high-wire act with no net. Daniel stared at Leo, seeing not a child, but a strategist, a warrior. The fear in his eyes was still there, but now it was mingled with something else, a desperate, dangerous hope. For 30 years, he had been paralyzed by the past. Now, the past had handed him a weapon. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Leo's mind was a whirlwind of images. The town square. The annual Founders' Day picnic, just 2 weeks away. The whole town would be there. The local news, Sheriff Thompson, up on the gazebo, giving his annual speech about the safety and integrity of their community. It was the perfect stage. A public platform where Rick Thompson would be at his most confident, his most arrogant, his most vulnerable. The Founders' Day picnic, Leo said, the plan crystallizing, audacious and terrifying. He gives a speech every year. We're going to give him a surprise. He looked at Daniel, his young face set with a grim adult resolve. We're going to make him confess. In front of everyone, the idea was insane. It was impossible. It was a 10-year-old boy and a broken man against the most powerful person in their world. But as Leo looked at the diary, at Sarah's last words, he knew they had no other choice. They couldn't let her down again. The climax was set. The trap was designed. The only question left was whether they would have the courage to spring it. The 2 weeks leading up to Founders Day were a blur of whispered conversations and clandestine planning. The diner became their secret headquarters. After closing time, with the blinds drawn and the doors locked, Leo and Daniel would huddle in a back booth. The diary and a map of the town square spread between them. The fear was a constant, metallic taste in their mouths, but it was now alloyed with a fragile, dangerous hope. They were no longer just a victim and a witness. They were conspirators, united by a 30-year-old promise. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. It hinged on psychological warfare. They couldn't force a confession with evidence alone. They had to break Rick Thompson's composure. To shatter the carefully constructed facade of the benevolent sheriff and expose the monster underneath. Their weapon was Sarah herself. They decided to bombard Rick with her memory, to resurrect her ghost in the days leading up to the picnic. Daniel, his hands shaking but his resolve firming with every passing day, was the instrument. He started by changing the music in the diner. He dug out his old box of cassette tapes from 1989 and began playing them. The Cure, The Smiths, Depeche Mode, Sarah's music. The first time Rick came in for his morning coffee and Pictures of You was playing, he stopped dead in the doorway. His jovial smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He scanned the diner, his eyes lingering on Daniel, who kept his own gaze fixed on the grill, his heart hammering. Rick said nothing, but he left his coffee half-finished. The next day, it was a friendship bracelet. Leo had taken the one from the trunk. Daniel left it on the counter near the cash register, as if it were a piece of lost property. It was woven from pink and purple thread, just like the one Sarah described making in her diary. Rick saw it when he paid for his coffee. His hand froze as he reached for his change. He stared at the bracelet, his face pulling slightly. "Someone leave this?" he asked, his voice tight. Daniel just shrugged, his back to him. "Guess so. Been there all morning." Rick didn't touch it. He left the diner quickly, without his usual booming farewell. They were small things, insignificant to anyone else, but to Rick, they were psychic grenades. They were whispers from the grave, reminders of a secret he thought was buried forever. Leo and Daniel were dismantling him, piece by piece. From the inside out, the day before the picnic was the final, most brutal part of the psychological assault. Daniel called the sheriff's office. He used a payphone 5 towns over, his voice disguised with a handkerchief over the receiver. He asked for Sheriff Thompson. "Rick, it's me," he'd whispered, his voice a broken, ghostly rasp. "I can't keep quiet anymore. What you did to Sarah, people are going to find out." Then he hung up. The real masterstroke, however, was Leo's. He took the white lace dress from the trunk. That night, under the cover of darkness, he crept through the sleeping town to the gazebo in the square. The gazebo where Rick would give his speech. With trembling fingers, he hung the dress from a hook inside the structure, positioning it so it would be hidden from the front, but visible to anyone standing at the podium. The dark, rust-colored stain on the bodice was a silent, screaming accusation. Founders. Day dawned bright and clear. The town square was a sea of red, white, and blue. Families spread blankets on the grass, children chased each other with balloons, and the smell of barbecue smoke filled the air. It was a perfect picture of small-town America, a wholesome facade hiding a rotten core. Leo stood near the back of the crowd, with his mother, his stomach a knot of terror. Across the square, he saw Daniel, standing near the edge of the trees. His face grim. At noon, the mayor stepped up to the podium on the gazebo. He gave a rambling speech, and then, with a flourish, he introduced the guest of honor. A man who has dedicated his life to this community. A man who keeps our children safe and our streets peaceful. Please give a warm Harmony Creek welcome to Sheriff Rick Thompson. A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Rick strode onto the gazebo, waving, his smile wide and confident. He was in his element, the beloved patriarch of his town. stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, everyone. It's an honor to serve this town, a town built on the values of family, integrity," and he stopped. His eyes scanning. The crowd had drifted to the interior of the gazebo behind the podium. He had seen it. The white dress. The change was instantaneous and profound. The confident smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The color drained from his face. His hands, resting on the podium, began to tremble. The crowd murmured, confused by the sudden, awkward silence. Rick's gaze darted wildly, scanning the faces in the crowd. He was looking for the source of the threat. His eyes landed on Daniel, standing pale and resolute by the trees. Their gazes locked across the square, a silent 30-year-old war culminating in this single public moment. Then, Rick's eyes found Leo. He saw the 10-year-old boy standing beside his mother, watching him with an unnervingly steady gaze. He saw the boy who had been in the diner. The boy who liked old music, and in that moment of pure, panicked clarity, he understood. "Sheriff, is everything all right?" the mayor asked, leaning towards him. Rick ignored him. He was unraveling. The music, the bracelet, the phone call, and now this. This impossible ghost of a dress. His carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. And then, the cinematic payoff. From the back of the crowd, a new sound emerged. Not music, a voice. Sarah's voice. Leo had taken a small, powerful Bluetooth speaker which he'd hidden. In his backpack, on his phone, he had a recording. Daniel, his voice choked with emotion, had read aloud the final terrifying entry from Sarah's diary. "He knows, I know. He's not my uncle at all. He was obsessed with her. He locked my door. He said we were going to have a special celebration tonight. He wants me to wear the white dress. I'm so scared. If I'm not here tomorrow, it was him. It was Rick Thompson. Don't let him get away with it." The recorded voice, amplified by the speaker, echoed across the silent, stunned town square. Every eye turned from the faltering sheriff to the source of the sound. Rick stared at Leo, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. The facade was gone. The monster was out. He lunged for the microphone. "Lies," he roared, his voice cracking with panic. "These are vicious lies. That man," he pointed a trembling finger at Daniel, "is a drunk, a failure. He's trying to ruin me. And this boy is disturbed." But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. The townspeople were looking at him, at his wild eyes, his panicked sweat. They were looking at the white dress hanging in the gazebo. A dress no one had seen before, but which now held a terrible significance. They were hearing the desperate plea of a girl whose name many of them had long forgotten. And then, the final poetic twist of fate, as Rick raved, his hand knocked over the pitcher of water on the podium. The water spilled across the wooden surface, and then, it dripped down onto a live wire from the sound system that had been improperly taped down. There was a bright flash, a shower of sparks, and a loud crackling buzz. Rick screamed, a high, agonized sound, as the electric current seized him. He convulsed, his body rigid, before collapsing to the floor of the gazebo. Smoke rising from his uniform, chaos erupted. People screamed, running in every direction. The mayor shouted for a doctor. But Leo just stood there, watching the scene unfold with a strange, numb calm. It wasn't the ending he had planned. It was something else. A bizarre, almost biblical form of justice. Rick Thompson, the man who had controlled everything, had been brought down by a series of small, random accidents. A spilled glass of water, a piece of faulty wiring. It was as if the universe itself had finally passed judgment. Paramedics rushed the stage, but it was clear that it was over. Sheriff Rick Thompson, the monster of Harmony Creek, was dead. In the ensuing chaos, Daniel walked slowly, deliberately. Across the grass to Leo, he knelt, his eyes, for the first time, clear of fear. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "She can rest now," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You did it, Leo. You kept her promise. Leo looked from the smoking ruin on the gazebo to the faces of his townspeople. Their expressions a mixture of horror, confusion, and dawning, terrible understanding. The secret was out. The scream had been heard, and Harmony Creek would never be the same. The public justice was swift, shocking, and brutally final. The catharsis was not in a courtroom verdict, but in the sudden, violent silence of a tyrant's voice. The aftermath was a quiet, lingering earthquake, its tremors reshaping the landscape of Harmony Creek and the lives of everyone in it. In the days that followed Founders Day, the town was a hive of state police investigators and news vans. The story of Sarah Jenkins, the girl who had been erased, was now on every television screen in the state. The trunk was taken from Leo's attic, its contents laid bare as evidence. The white lace dress, the cassette tapes, the letters, the stuffed unicorn, each object a testament to a stolen life. And the badge, Frank Thompson's badge, became the centerpiece of a narrative of generational corruption that shocked the community to its core. The official story was that Sheriff Thompson had died of a heart attack, induced by the electric shock, but everyone in Harmony Creek knew the truth. They had seen the look on his face, they had heard the girl's voice from the past. They had witnessed the monster shed its skin just before the end. The town's innocence, a carefully guarded illusion, was shattered forever. People looked at each other differently in the grocery store, at the post office. They wondered what other secrets were buried behind the neat picket fences, what other monsters wore familiar faces. Daniel Miller became an unlikely, reluctant hero. He gave his statement to the state police, his voice steady as he recounted the events of that Halloween night in 1989, and the 30 years of fear that followed. The diary was authenticated. His story, once the source of his shame, became his liberation. He no longer walked with his shoulders slumped. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a quiet, somber peace. He still ran the diner, but now, when he looked out the window, he wasn't watching for ghosts. Leo's life changed, too. He was questioned, of course, but gently. The investigators saw him not as a co-conspirator, but as what he was, a child, who had stumbled upon a terrible truth and had the courage to see it through. His mother held him tight, her tears a mixture of horror at what her son had been through and a dawning, sickening realization that she had been blind to the evil that had sat at her diner counter, laughing and drinking coffee, for years. Their relationship was strained for a while, freighted with the weight of things unsaid, but, eventually, they found their way back to each other, bound by a shared trauma and a fierce, protective love. A few months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, a new headstone was placed in the Harmony Creek Cemetery. It was next to the one belonging to Sarah's father. It read, Sarah Jenkins 197-1989, a daughter, a friend. Her voice was heard. There was a small informal ceremony. Just a few people, Leo and his mother, Daniel, a handful of Sarah's childhood friends, now middle-aged, who had come forward with their own stories of Rick's unsettling possessiveness. Stories they had been too young or too afraid to understand. At the time, they stood before the polished granite, a quiet gathering of souls linked by a single tragic life. Daniel laid a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, not the sickly sweet potpourri from the trunk, but fresh, vibrant flowers, full of life. I'm sorry, Sarah, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I was late. Leo stood beside him, his hands in his pockets. He thought about the attic, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light. He had gone up there looking for a secret, a childhood adventure. He had come down with the weight of a life in his hands. He was not the same boy. He had seen the darkness that lurked beneath the ordinary, the profound cost of silence, and the incredible power of a single voice refusing to be extinguished. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Leo looked at the grave marker. It was a final, quiet acknowledgement of a life that had been violently stolen. It was an ending, but it was also a beginning. The haunting echo of Sarah's story would linger over Harmony Creek for generations, a tragic reminder of the cost of truth, a cautionary tale whispered from parent to child. It was a scar on the town's heart, a permanent mark that would ensure that no one would ever forget the girl with the defiant smile. And the day her voice finally broke a 30 silence. The healing was bittersweet, the peace hard-won. And for Leo, the world would forever be a place of deeper shadows and brighter, more precious light. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that the most terrifying ghosts are not the ones who are dead, but the ones who are allowed to walk among us, unchallenged.